I found my missing brother on a forum for the dead. I never thought much about online forums until one of them brought my brother back. Ryan had been missing for 2 years. One day, he went out to grab coffee and never came back. No suspicious activity on his bank account, no weird phone calls, no signs of struggle, just gone. The police said he'd likely been abducted, but without evidence, they couldn't do much. My family fell apart. My mum stopped eating, my dad stopped talking, and I just stopped feeling. Late one night, while spiraling through forums about unsolved disappearances, I stumbled upon a thread titled "Messages from Beyond, Connecting with the Lost." It was buried deep within an obscure corner of the internet and full of people claiming to receive messages from the dead. It sounded ridiculous, but one comment caught my attention. A user named Echoing Void posted, "Sometimes the missing don't know they're gone. Sometimes they're here, looking for home." Below, someone replied, "How do you know?" And Void answered, "Because I am one." For whatever reason, grief, desperation, or lack of sleep, I created an account and messaged Void. I typed, "If you're really one of the missing, prove it. Tell me something only you would know." The response came within minutes. "What do you want me to prove? That you once broke Ryan's nose during a stupid fight over a game of Mario Kart? That he forgave you before you forgave yourself?" My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about that, not even my parents. It was just one of those childhood moments you carry like a secret scar. I asked, "Who are you?" Void's reply, "I think you know." The next few weeks were a blur. I spent hours every night talking to Void. He said the world he was in was a fractured reflection of ours, familiar but empty. The sky was always grey, the streets abandoned, the air heavy with silence. He couldn't explain how he got there, only that he woke up in this place and couldn't leave. The more we talked, the more he sounded like Ryan. He even remembered details no one else could, like the nickname he used to call our childhood dog, or how he'd secretly taped my embarrassing middle school dance recital to blackmail me later. One night, Void said something that terrified me. He typed, "They're watching me now. They don't like that I'm talking to you." I asked who they were, but his responses became cryptic. "The shadows. The ones who keep us here. They don't like noise." That was the last I heard from him for weeks. Then a new message appeared in my inbox. "Do you want to see me?" Attached was a link to a live video feed. I hesitated, but clicked. The stream showed a dimly lit street that looked eerily like the one Ryan and I grew up on. The houses were distorted, their shapes wavering as if viewed through heat haze. In the distance, a figure walked toward the camera. As they drew closer, I recognized his face. It was Ryan. But something was off. His eyes were too wide, his movements stiff, like a puppet on strings. He smiled at the camera, but it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was forced, unnatural. He raised a hand and waved. In the live chat beside the video, he typed, "It's me. I told you I was here." I couldn't move. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. Suddenly, the camera shook violently. The shadows behind Ryan began to shift and ripple, forming towering figures with jagged edges. They moved closer, their distorted limbs reaching for him. Ryan typed, "They're coming. You have to help me. Find the door." The feed cut out. I spent the next few days piecing together everything he'd said about his world, looking for clues about the door. It wasn't much, but he'd mentioned a specific place from our childhood, an old abandoned cabin in the woods where we used to play. I drove there, half expecting nothing. The cabin was just as we'd left it, rotting and overgrown. Inside, I found a trapdoor beneath a threadbare rug. The ladder below led to a tunnel that stretched on for what felt like miles. At the end was a heavy iron door with strange carvings. As I touched it, my phone buzzed. A message from Void. "They know you're here. Don't let them in." Before I could reply, the shadows began to seep through the walls, crawling toward me like living tar. I shoved the door open and stepped through. I don't know how to explain what happened next. One moment, I was in the tunnel. The next, I was standing in the grey, empty world Ryan had described. The air was heavy, the silence deafening, and there he was, standing a few feet away, staring at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Ryan," I whispered. But before he could respond, the shadows surged forward. The last thing I remember is his scream. I woke up in my bed the next morning, clutching a piece of paper I'd never seen before. Written on it, in Ryan's handwriting, were the words, "Don't stop looking." There's another door. It started with the sweater, a simple navy blue pullover I thought I'd lost months ago. It was folded neatly on the top shelf of my boyfriend's closet, and I only noticed it because I was hunting for a blanket while he was in the shower. I pulled it down, frowning. "Hey Nick," I called out, holding it up as he came back into the room, toweling his hair. "Isn't this my sweater? I thought I lost it." Nick froze for just a second, then shrugged. "Oh yeah, you left it here ages ago. I forgot to mention it." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. I didn't remember ever bringing that sweater to his place. That nagging feeling stayed with me over the next few days. It wasn't like Nick to keep secrets. We'd been dating for 2 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I trusted him. But this felt different. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until Nick was out running errands, then went back to his closet. The sweater was still on the shelf, but as I scanned the other items, I noticed something odd. A plain cardboard box tucked in the corner, partially hidden by a stack of old shoes. My name was scrawled on the lid. Heart pounding, I pulled the box out and opened it. Inside was a collection of things that were unmistakably mine. A hairbrush I hadn't seen in over a year. A photo of me from high school that I'd lost when I moved out of my parents' house. A necklace my best friend gave me for my birthday, the one I thought I'd dropped somewhere in the city. My stomach turned. These weren't things I could have accidentally left behind. They were items I hadn't seen in years, things I thought were gone forever. Then I found the notebook. It was a cheap spiral-bound journal, one I used to carry around for doodling and writing grocery lists. Flipping through the pages, my throat tightened. The handwriting wasn't mine, it was Nick's. Page after page, he'd written down details about me. Things I liked, things I didn't, places I went, people I talked to. The final pages were the worst. They weren't about me anymore, they were about us. Things I hadn't even told him, arguments we never had. Future plans I'd never agreed to, and at the very end, scrawled in a frantic looping hand, was a single sentence repeated over and over. "She'll understand eventually." I didn't hear Nick come back. By the time I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "I told you to stay out of my closet," he said, his voice eerily calm. I tried to speak, to explain, but my words caught in my throat. Nick stepped closer, slowly closing the door behind him. "It's okay," he said softly. "Now we can finally talk about what's next." A few weeks ago, I started working as a night shift security guard for an old office building downtown. The place is mostly empty at night, just a few cleaning staff and the occasional late-working executive. The job seemed easy. Check the cameras, do an hourly patrol of the building, and make sure everything stays locked up. At first, the hardest part was staying awake. I'd sip coffee at my desk and glance at the cameras, which usually showed nothing but empty hallways. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you notice every little sound. It was on my third night when I saw something strange. Around 3 a.m., the motion sensor in the west stairwell went off. The camera feed showed nothing, just an empty staircase. I figured it was a glitch. Sensors in older buildings can be finicky. But when I went to check it out, I found the stairwell door open. I was sure I'd locked it earlier during my rounds. I shrugged it off and locked the door again. Maybe one of the cleaning staff had used it and forgotten to close it. But when I asked the cleaners about it, they swore they hadn't gone near that stairwell. The following night, it happened again. Same time, same stairwell. This time, I didn't bother checking it out. I just locked the door remotely and made a note in my report. On my 5th night, things got weirder. I was reviewing the camera footage from earlier in the evening when I noticed something odd. At 2:47 a.m., the west stairwell camera showed the door slowly creaking open. No one was there. The hallway was empty. But as the door swung wide, the lights in the stairwell flickered just once. I rewound the footage and watched it again, and that's when I noticed it. Just before the lights flickered, a shadow passed across the bottom of the stairs. It was quick, like someone had darted just out of view of the camera. That was the first time I felt uneasy. The next night, I decided to do my rounds early, hoping to get ahead of whatever was going on. I started with the west stairwell, checking every door and corner. Everything was locked, exactly as it should be. But when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something on the wall, scratches. Long, deep marks running down the paint, as if someone had dragged their fingernails across it. I reported the scratches to my supervisor the next morning, but he just laughed. "It's an old building," he said. "These things happen." Last night was my breaking point. Around 3:15 a.m., I heard a noise. Not through the cameras, but with my own ears. A low rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on a door. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from the direction of the west stairwell. I hesitated, my heart racing, then grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the noise. When I reached the stairwell, the tapping stopped. The door was open again, swinging gently on its hinges. The air in the stairwell was freezing, much colder than the rest of the building. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight down the stairs. That's when I heard it. A whisper, faint, almost inaudible, coming from the bottom of the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. I froze, listening, and then the whisper stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I turned and left the stairwell, locking the door behind me. I didn't finish my rounds that night. Instead, I sat at the security desk, staring at the monitors, waiting for my shift to end. I called out sick today. I'm not sure if I'm going back. For as long as I can remember, I've been terrified of aliens. When you were growing up, you might have asked your parents to check under the bed for monsters, but I made my parents check for aliens. I'm not sure where my fear of extraterrestrial intelligence came from, but as I grew older, that fear turned to curiosity. I wanted to learn everything I could about the stars and other worlds. When my boyfriend and I first moved in together and I shared this interest with him, he suggested I download a star map app on my phone. Whenever you're curious about a constellation or star, the app will tell you what you're looking at, he explained. Living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of our building, we didn't exactly have space for a telescope, so we figured this was a happy medium. Our bedroom window offered a stunning view of the grassy field below, and while we could never see that many stars because of light pollution from the neighboring city, the few celestial bodies we could see were enough to entertain me before falling asleep each night. "Jack," I'd say, my eyes focused on the sky outside. "Look at that light up in the sky. Is that a UFO?" When you're fascinated, scared of aliens, every foreign light in the sky is a UFO until proven otherwise. "Probably," Jack would joke. "What does your star app say?" I'd sit up to throw my legs over the side of the bed, stretching my arms towards the window, my phone pointed outside. "Oh, it's just Mars," I'd respond, somewhat relieved. Jack would smile, kiss my forehead, and settle back into his corner of the bed. This continued throughout the years, and the app really was useful every time there was a strange light in the sky. But this past month, I noticed a new light in our atmosphere. Jack always had an explanation for me. It's a planet, or it's just a star, but this didn't explain the fact that every night it was much brighter than anything else in the sky. It always changed location too. Some nights it would be closer to the horizon, right in front of us, and other nights it would be further off into the distance, almost on the other side of the sky. My star app was never able to identify the mysterious glow. Finally, I earned Jack's interest. "Jack, look, that light in the sky, it's flashing now," I shouted to him. He sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes to look at the bright, blinking body. "You're right, what is that?" he replied, getting out of bed to get a closer look. Meekly, we both snuck over to the window, staring at the mysterious, flickering object that was now darting quickly through the darkness. Its movements were erratic, moving vertically as well as horizontally in space. But I looked at Jack, his eyes wide in alarm, and realized he had come to the same conclusion. The light in the sky looked as though it was searching for something. "Should we close the curtains?" I whispered, my eyes once again glued to the glimmer on the other side of the thin pane of glass. "Yes," Jack replied curtly as he let go of my hand to grab the drapes. That small movement was enough to gain the attention of the floating object in the sky. Its focus immediately turned to us, its blinding light shining directly into our apartment. My mouth fell open as I stared into the beam, frozen in fear. A resounding silence flooded the air as I held my breath, and I realized that the window pane, it was gone. I could feel the biting night air on my naked face. With a gust of air and in the blink of an eye, the glowing object was upon us. I screamed. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted for the door, falling over my own feet on my way to the exit. "Jack!" I shrieked, tears stinging my cheeks. "Jack!" I screamed again as I spun around to find him still at the window, seemingly in a trance that nothing could break. The light flooding our room was so bright I could barely see. "Jack!" I pleaded once more. He didn't move, his body illuminated by the devastating radiance. The glow became so overwhelming that I had to close my eyes. When I finally opened them, the brilliance of the entity was replaced by the glow of the morning sun, which shone through the now intact window of our bedroom. I gasped, finding myself in our bed, shaking awake from the nightmare. I rolled over to grab Jack, only to realize that he wasn't there. Tears welled up in my eyes as I rushed to grab my phone. I had 27 missed calls from various family members. Only then did I realize that 8 days had passed since Jack and I had last retired to bed. I don't know what happened to me during those days I've lost, and I'm not sure that I want to know. What I did know was that it was pointless to look for Jack. I would never see him again, and I knew this as fact somehow. The understanding was like an immense weight on my chest, once again making it difficult to breathe. With trembling hands, I turned my phone off and fell back asleep, not yet ready to face reality. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, a getaway from the stress of work and the chaos of life. I packed my gear, loaded up the truck, and headed to a remote lake in northern Minnesota, far away from the noise of civilization. Before I left, though, I stopped by a bait shop on the edge of town to stock up on supplies. The place was old, with faded signs and dusty shelves, but the owner seemed friendly enough, a grizzled man in his 60s who looked like he'd spent most of his life outdoors. "You're headed up to Coldwater Lake?" he asked, handing me a bundle of wax worms. "Yeah," I replied, trying to match his casual tone. He paused for a moment, his weathered face tightening. "Be careful out there. It's not just the cold you've got to watch for." I laughed nervously, thinking he was referring to thin ice or maybe bears. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, lowering his voice like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "Strange things happen up there. People hear sounds, see things. Folks around here don't like to talk about it, but you'd do well to keep your eyes open and your fire burning." I chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off as local superstition. "Thanks for the tip," I said, paying for my supplies and heading out the door. But as I walked back to my truck, I couldn't shake the look in his eyes. Something between fear and pity. It stayed with me during the drive, and when I finally arrived at the lake, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. Like I said before, it was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. The locals warned me about the weather. They said the cold could seep into your bones and never leave. But I wasn't worried. I'd ice fished a dozen times before and thought I knew the dangers. Boy, was I wrong. The lake was a vast, frozen sheet of white, surrounded by dense pine trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. I set up my tent in the middle of the lake, drilled a hole in the ice, and settled in for what I hoped would be a peaceful day of fishing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted. The stillness of the lake became unnerving. No wind, no sounds, just silence. It was as if the world had been put on mute. That's when I heard it. A faint, distant scream. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the cry of an owl. It was human, but not quite. A wail that carried pain, hunger, and something primal. I froze, my breath fogging the air as I strained to listen. The sound came again, closer this time, echoing across the icy expanse. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew better. The ice beneath me groaned and cracked, a sound every ice fisherman fears. But this wasn't the natural settling of the ice. It felt purposeful, as if something massive was moving beneath me. Panic set in. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the lake. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the trees, a figure stood, tall and impossibly thin. Its eyes glowed like embers in the darkness, piercing through the shadows and locking onto me. Antlers jutted from its head, twisted and jagged, and its skeletal face was stretched into a horrific grin. It stepped onto the ice with unnatural grace, its long, clawed hands dragging against the surface. The scream came again, but this time it was in my head. A deafening roar that filled my mind with images of starvation, death, and despair. I scrambled to pack my gear, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my bag. The creature moved closer, its body convulsing as if it were struggling to contain itself. Its teeth, jagged and yellow, gnashed together in anticipation. Then it stopped. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and let out a guttural hiss that sent chills down my spine. Without thinking, I grabbed the propane heater and hurled it toward the beast. The flames erupted on impact, and the Wendigo shrieked, a sound so inhuman and agonizing that I thought my eardrums would burst. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran, leaving everything behind, my boots pounding against the ice until I reached the truck. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The lake was empty, but I swear I could still hear the faint echo of that scream, following me through the night. I haven't gone ice fishing since. And when people ask why, I just tell them the truth. There's something out there in the cold, something that doesn't belong in this world.